Welcome back to another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. I am Craig King, your host. And ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Kelly is standing. Well, he's actually sitting, but he actually walked here. He's not crawling. He's not malnourished from finishing up his fifth session. Fifth session. Yeah. So how do you feel, Patrick? The session is pretty much done. It's done.
I'm feeling good, Craig. I mean, we are entering the official summer season, done with teaching for the year, done with the legislature for the year. Cross-country conditioning starts next week, so coach's life never ends. But let's be real. The most important news of all, Chick-fil-A Peach Milkshake comes out June 9th.
Whoa.
Mark that one down.
Well, speaking of food and things that taste good, I'm going to ask you guys if you see Patrick Kelly in the streets to get on him a little bit, because he was getting out of here the other day and he told me, yeah, I got to pick up dinner for my daughter. And I said, what you going to get? I said, pizza night. And so the next day he comes into work. I said, what'd you do for dinner? And he was like, grilled chicken. I'm like, Patrick, you got to do better, man. Come on.
Hey, we had a lovely dinner. Most important thing is that my child got fed. Like that's box checked.
Yeah, you did.
And the peach milkshake wasn't out yet, so I didn't have that as an option.
Yeah, you could have got Lita Streets, but they're closed right now.
That's right.
Shout out to Lita. Hope you guys open up soon. But
yeah,
that's not why none of our listeners have come to listen to us today. Let's talk about the end of the session. So state budget is the probably top priority. What happened with that? More specifically, the salary schedule.
Yeah, so the state budget is now done for all intents and purposes. The legislature came back on May 28th. The House and the Senate voted to approve it. Now, the one remaining thing is the governor now gets about a week to review the budget, and he can issue line item vetoes, which means he can strike specific lines and portions of the budget and still sign the rest of it into law. If he line item vetoes things, then the legislature could come back to attempt to override them, but they don't have to. They could just let the line item vetoes stand. So we're not all the way done, but we're pretty much done. And I feel 100% confident we're done on the salary schedule, because I don't anticipate the governor line item vetoing that. So what that does, just to clear up some confusion that exists, and it happens every year because the salary issue is really a two-tiered process for teachers. Number one, the state establishes a statewide minimum salary schedule that no district can pay below. So if you're between 0 and 28 years of experience, you must be paid no less than the cell that you fall in on the state schedule based on your years of experience and your educational attainment level. The statewide minimum schedule in this year's budget raises starting teacher pay to no less than $48,500. It also increases every cell in the bachelor's, master's plus 30, and doctorate lanes by $1,500, the same as that initial starting cell. So it is a uniform raise across the entire schedule. And I continue to see some conversations around the state budget. It's great that it supports starting teachers, but what about the veterans? That was a valid concern in 2024 because the budget allowed for differing levels of raises across the schedule. This year's raises are uniform. So it doesn't matter if you're a first-year teacher with a bachelor's degree or a 27th-year teacher with a doctorate, you're seeing the same $1,500 increase in cells and the same eligibility for a step increase to your pay. That's now locked. It is done. No district can pay below that. This year, about half of the districts in the state were paying at or above the state minimum. About 20-ish districts were already paying beyond the new state minimum. So now what happens is local school boards, now that the state budget is done, local school boards and county councils, depending on which county you're in, have to approve their budget. That is ultimately what sets your salary. It cannot be below what the state has set, but it can be exactly what the state has set.
Right.
So if you are in a district that was already paying beyond the new statewide minimum, your district doesn't have to do anything to salaries. It could be the same next year as it was this year. Now, your district's getting more money from the state this year, and we'll talk about that in a second, but they're not required to do anything. If you're in a district that was paying at the state minimum last year, well, now your district has to raise every cell by $1,500. So the ultimate question of how much do I get paid is determined by your local board, and educators need to pay attention over the next 3 weeks to what their local boards finally approve now that the state budget's in place.
Yeah, and if you're wondering statewide minimum and you feel like, what is that? The land that Patrick sent out this past Friday has an example of this new statewide minimum salary schedule. Actually, you didn't send it out last Friday. You sent it out
yesterday, the 28th.
Yesterday, the 28th. That's right. And so you can take a look at that. But like Patrick said, now that the budget is passed, local school boards and councils will meet and figure out what they are going to fund. They can't fund below that statewide minimum. But if they're already paying above it, they don't have to change anything. But there was money sent from the state for them to do more if they choose to. So, Patrick, are there any changes to the funding formula?
Yeah, so if the salary schedule was confusing, the funding formula says, hold my peach milkshake, and I'll show you what's confusing. Yeah. So what the state has done is the legislature sending an additional $112 million in state aid to classroom funds to schools in the coming school year, the 25-26 school year. State aid to classrooms is the primary largest single line item in the budget for K-12 education. It is now roughly $4.4 billion with a B dollars.
Wow.
Last year, it was a little under $4.3 billion. So they're increasing it by $112 million. That $112 million, if you think of it as a pie, the slice of the pie that every district gets, because it's allocated to districts and to charter authorizers. So we got 3 operating statewide charter authorizers. They count as districts for the distribution of state aid to classroom funds. You got an entire pie that's $112 million. The slice of the pie that a district or charter authorizer gets is based on a weighted pupil count. So instead of just distributing it on enrollment alone. So if Greenville County Schools accounts for 5% of the students in the state, I have no idea if that's accurate. So Greenville County, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if it was just a straight student count, then Greenville County would get 5% of the total pie. But a weighted system means that every student counts as one, but some students count as more than one. They get an additional weighting if, and there's a whole host of different weightings, but the biggies are students in poverty, students with an IEP, students that are gifted and talented. So if a student falls into one or more of those categories, they could count as 2 students, 2.5 students, 3 students. The distribution of state aid to classrooms is proportionate to your weighted student base. So if you've got 10,000 students in your district, but that weighting comes out to 16,000 students, then you take your weighted student base for your district divided by the total weighted student count of the state. That's the percentage of the pie you get. Man, that's confusing.
It is, yeah.
So here's what happened. Over the last 3 years, when new money has gone into state aid to classrooms, roughly 75% of the new funds have gone to traditional school districts and 25% have gone to charter school districts or charter school authorizers. Charter students get an additional weighting in the system because they don't get local property tax revenues. This is the state's way of supporting charters in light of their lack of local funding. So if I'm a charter student in a brick and mortar, I get a additional weighting. And if I'm a charter in a virtual or a student in a virtual charter school, I get a lesser weighting. And that weighting has been 0.65 for the last 3 years. So a virtual charter student doesn't count as 1, they count as 6.5. This year, because the math was mathing, and please don't ask me to explain this, my daughter has successfully navigated pre-calculus, and I can now go back to never doing math again. But the way the math this year is the $112 million, when run through the formula, resulted in about 55% of the new money going to traditional districts and about 45% going to charter districts. There was a figure floating around in early February that never seemed to die that had, of the $112 million, $90 million going to charters. That's false. That was never true. And that really complicated this conversation at the State House because legislators don't like when people advocate and push them on things that are not grounded in fact because it makes their job unduly difficult. But the 55-45 split is way different than the 75-25 that's existed for the last 3 years. So long story short, the House of Representatives decided to change the weighting for a virtual charter school student from 0.65 to 0.35, which would have brought the total distribution of new money closer to 75%, 25%. The Senate did not want to make that change. So in conference committee, the House and Senate conference committee members decided to literally split the baby down the middle. They went with a 0.5 weighting for virtual charter school students. So it was 0.65. The House wanted 0.35. They landed on 0.5. And so what that means is that the distribution of that $112 million new dollars, because this is all what this comes down to, is how much new money do you get over the money you got last year. The traditional school districts will get roughly $70 million new dollars. That's about $10 million more than they would have received under the old 0.65 weighting system for virtual charter students. Charter authorizers will get $40 million approximately new dollars. And it is really important to note that is $40 million more than they received last year. The conference committee compromise does not reduce charter funding next year. They're still getting more money. They're just getting less new money than they would have gotten under the old formula. So instead of a 55-45 split of new money, roughly we're at a 65-35 split of new money for the coming year.
Got it. Thank you for explaining that, Patrick. You deserve a peach milkshake for that.
That's the best I could do.
Before we transition from the state budget, any new provisos in the state budget we need to be aware of?
No, I mean, this year wasn't quite as earth-shaking in the proviso world for K-12 as it was last year. Like nothing about the free-to-focus cell phone proviso last year obviously was a ground shaker. And heads up, that's still in the budget. It didn't go anywhere. So free-to-focus exists next year. Anybody that thought this was a one-year thing that's not how it works with provisos. Once they're in, they're in. That still exists. Probably the two that I would say are most interesting in the K-12 space that I just put on people's radar is, number one, we've talked about this before, there's a proviso that will prohibit districts from requiring any benchmark assessment that was district selected from counting in a student grade. Districts can still give benchmarks, they can still require them, but that student performance on that test cannot be part of calculating the student's course grade. There's some real concern in the legislature about benchmark practices, about grade floors, about grade inflation. I think the benchmark proviso is an opening salvo in a larger conversation at the legislature and at the State Board of Education about grading practices. The other new proviso of note is one that Representative Neil Collins out of the upstate really pushed for. What it requires is the South Carolina Student Loan Corporation to take existing money, so it's not really spending new money, it's just directing how they spend their money. They have to take $5 million and make it available for student loan refinancing for teachers. So if you got a student loan and it's a high interest rate, there's going to be $5 million available for refinancing options to hopefully lower your interest rate. The other thing it does is it requires $5 million to be available to teachers in the districts that had the highest vacancy rates this year, that had more than 10% vacancies, and these are rural counties in South Carolina. Right. That $5 million has to be available for straight-up loan forgiveness for teachers in those districts, so wipe out your loan balance. So if you've got a student loan, keep an eye out for that. The exact process for how do you apply for refinancing or forgiveness is going to have to be worked out. But when PSTA gets that info, we will certainly blast it out to members. But if you got a student loan, keep your eye on it. That could potentially be some significant money.
Thanks, Patrick. Anything else on state budget before we
move
on?
No, right. I think that's it.
So I think one of the biggest successes that we experienced as the education community was the passage of the Educator Assistance Act. But let's talk about the implementation of that.
Yeah.
And so salary, contracts, let's dive into that.
Yeah, so the Educator Assistance Act requires districts to put a projected minimum salary on a teacher contract. And so I've already gotten several emails, phone calls, messages from individuals saying, well, wait a second. The legislature passed the bill in early May. The governor signed it, but my contract I signed by May 10th didn't have a salary figure on it, so is the contract invalid? The answer is no. The Educator Assistance Act's effective date, every bill passed by the legislature, the last clause in it will have an effective date. Sometimes it's upon signature of the governor. Sometimes it's at a date in the future. The Educator Assistance Act, final line, is effective July 1, 2025. So any contract you signed and returned by May 10th, 2025 was not subject to the terms of the Educator Assistance Act. So the contract you signed is valid for this coming school year. You're not going to see a new one. You can't argue that you should see a new one. But for the 26-27 school year, for the first time ever, every teacher in the state is going to see a projected minimum salary on their contract.
Great clarification. And so let's transition to the certificate renewal. We've heard a lot of comments on that part of it and how it works.
Mm-hmm.
When is the effective date of that? So talk about the certificate renewal.
Yeah, so
legislation.
This one's important because the Educator Assistance Act, again, I think is transformative for removing a duplicative and really burdensome process for teachers in terms of accumulating those 120-hour renewal hours and keeping up with the little certificates and filing them all every 5 years. But this is going to be a lagging implementation. And the reason why is because, A, it doesn't start till July 1st, 2025. But what the bill does to reduce and eliminate the burden of recertification is it requires districts to award renewal credits for your district PD. So let's say that my certificate expires in June 2026. In the 25-26 school year, my district will have to award renewal credits to me for the PD I do with my district. That could be 30-plus hours of renewal credits. So at the end of the 25-26 school year, I've got 30 renewal credits that my district is already accounted for in the MySC Educator system because the State Department of Education is creating a new field where when districts go in at the end of every year, this is something your HR department does, they go in to verify that you completed another year of experience, and that's the same portal where you can see your teacher certificate. Mm-hmm. Now there's a field where the district can simply check a box that says completed renewal activities. So you're going to have those hours. But if those are the only renewal hours you have in June 2026, you don't have 120 yet.
Right.
So it's not an automatic thing to where forward from now and forever, you don't have to have the documentation. Now, if you just completed renewal in June 2025, high five. You're good. You work the next 5 years. The district's going to automatically award you renewal credits come 2030. Good Lord, that sounds way far out, but I guess it's not.
It's really not.
You're going to be good to go. But if your renewal's coming up in 26, 27, 28, or 29, you probably still have to have a couple of renewal hours on your own. The number will diminish, of course, as you get closer to 2030.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, Patrick. And so teachers listening, it really depends on when your cycle is. Whether it's next year, the following year, and you can figure out and know what your district is going to account for and then what you still need to be responsible for. Thank you for that, Patrick. What about teachers about to retire?
So if you're about to retire, what's going to happen is after July 1, the Department of Education is going to develop a form or a letter or a online portal, I'm not 100%, something where you can request to maintain your certificate for a lifetime. And every 5 years, you will simply have to go into this portal, complete this form, whatever the department does, that simply says, I want my certificate to remain active. And if you say yes, your certificate is active. And now if you go back to work, if you're a working retiree, you will still have to do district PD. You will still have to do the annual evaluation, just like every other teacher. But if you're retired, you don't have to worry about renewal credits anymore. Once the department has developed that process for requesting it, PSTA will make sure members know.
All right. Last thing on the Educator Assistance Act, back to school.
Yeah, back to school 2025. The start date of the act is July 1. Mm-hmm. And to my knowledge, there's not a district in this state that is bringing teachers back in June of 2025. I mean, we could be moving that direction. But to my knowledge, we're not there yet.
There's going to be a district that says, hold my peach milkshake. Sure.
Well, I'll take their peach milkshake. So since everybody's starting after July 1, the pre-school year activities or preschool year elements of the Educator Assistance Act will be in force. And the two that are important to note are the Educator Assistance Act requires your district to notify you of your teaching assignment, your location, your subject, at least 14 days prior to students reporting to school. The other thing it requires is that you must have 2 fully unencumbered work days prior to the start of the year. No meetings, no IEPs, no PD, no training. Now, the bill doesn't specify that it's got to be 2 complete days. Like the district could still chop it up. Like if you got half day of training in the morning and half day in the afternoon, well, there's half of your 2 days. But you've got to have those 2 days. That is the law come July 1. So you should be seeing that whenever you get your email from your principal about welcome back. Here's what we're going to do in the 5 days before students show up because teachers report early. You should see work time in there.
All right. Yeah, the Educator Assistance Act. Thank you for clarifying some of those points, Patrick, about that. So the work experience credit, I think it was Senate Bill 78 that passed. And so a lot of chatter about that, a lot of teachers excited about that. So how do teachers go about receiving that, and what is the process for the State Department creating that?
Yeah. So what the bill, it applies to new educators. It applies to current educators. So if you're a current educator with occupational related experience to your teaching field, you will be eligible to apply for work experience credit. But that application will have to be reviewed by the department, similar to the department reviewing a request to add an endorsement to your certificate, to add a new certification field. This is the way certificates work. So the bill, now law, says the department has 180 days from the signature of the governor to develop whatever the application process is. I didn't do the math before the podcast. I guess I could have asked Google to tell me what 180 days from the signature was, but that's roughly a 6-month period. Mm-hmm. The department has until roughly November to get this done. So, and I can promise you they're not going to be releasing, now they could prove me wrong, but I would be beyond impressed if they get the application available in June or July, simply because they are swamped processing all the new certification applications they get from recent college graduates. Mm-hmm. But they got till November. Once that application is available, PSTA will inform members. I'm sure the department will probably inform teachers via their ability to just email everybody. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to apply. Once you apply, the department will tell you how many years you're eligible to have added to your certificate. They will apply the years to your certificate. You will be eligible for the resulting increase in pay because you go up steps on the salary schedule for the 26-27 school year, because the law says that an application for work experience credit that is approved applies to your salary for the coming school year. Mm-hmm. So since the application won't be ready until the 25-26 school year is started, no one will receive a pay adjustment until 26-27, but you're going to want to get the application in 25-26 so you're eligible for higher pay in 26-27.
Yeah, and that's a good explanation, Patrick, because we understand districts have set budgets by then. Mm-hmm. They can't do a retroactive pay type thing because they're in the middle of the school year. And so completely understand that. But like Patrick said, once we find out, we will definitely share with you. Anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. 24 minutes, Patrick.
Best 24 minutes of pure knowledge gold.
Look at that. Well, I know you enjoyed, Patrick, all this session talking. I'm just, moderating this thing. It's his dream, man. This is all about Patrick Kelly here, ladies and gentlemen, and the Buffalo Bills, who, again, failed to win the Super Bowl.
This is the year.
This is the year. Is this
it? This coming year is their last year in the old stadium.
Oh. What a way to go out.
ESPN loves that kind of crud because when the 30 for 30 episode drops in a couple years, it's going to be titled something like Dreams Do Eventually Come True after 80 years. The fact that it's the last year in the old stadium, plus, fun fact, people want to join me, this year's calendar, Bills are in Charlotte. Be
Ooh.
there. It's going to be a good time. Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, Panthers fans, but Josh Allen takes names.
It's all good. Well, it's been another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. This is Craig King, your host. Go Niners. Take care.